Welcome. We're glad that you could join us today at Ashland Theological Seminary. I'm pleased to be able to have a conversation with Dr. William Payne. Dr. Payne is a professor of evangelism and world missions at Ashland Theological Seminary, and he is also director of chaplaincy studies. Bill, welcome. I'm glad I have the opportunity to speak with you today.
Thank you, Matt.
So let's talk about chaplaincy. You are a retired Navy chaplain, chaplain that served for almost 30 years, and you do oversee our chaplaincy program. Professional chaplaincy has certainly grown remarkably in recent years. So I have a couple of questions about that. The first is, what accounts for that growth, and why are chaplains in such demand?
What's fueling the growth in chaplaincy? That's a good question. Chaplaincy has always been a part of Christian ministry. It flows out of the pastoral office. It flows out of the understanding of the Jewish rabbinical office. Back in the Middle Ages, we had Catholic orders of people who were basically chaplains. They cared for the sick and they cared for the pilgrims, and they did those type of things. Typically, chaplaincy is an extension of the church outside of the church. It's how the church does ministry with people on the periphery of society or those who can't come to a church. And so it's when we go to them in ministry. The reason it's been growing, I believe, is that people are realizing that church-centric ministry is very important, but it's not enough. Lots of people today believe in God and have a desire to be connected with God, but they're not a part of a denomination. They don't go to church. And when they have a crisis situation, they want to have a person, a spiritual counselor, a person of God, to be next to them, to do those things that a pastor does. So today we have the growth of the hospice industry. Chaplains are very critical to the hospice program. We have the growth in marketplace chaplains. The marketplace has realized that chaplains in the workspace really are an added bonus because it increases the attitude of the people, it increases work proficiency, it makes people feel cared for, it gives the employer a way to understand what's going on in the trenches. Marketplace chaplains have been a real positive development. And we're just seeing across the board new types of chaplaincy that's coming into existence every day.
Yeah, very good. Along with that, now you mentioned a couple of settings that chaplains serve in, hospice being one, marketplace being another. What are some of the various settings that chaplains serve in today? And give us a description of maybe what does a day look like for a chaplain?
It would depend on what type of chaplaincy they're doing, obviously. But chaplains work in all types of places, some places that you may not even think about. For example, I've been working with the state to fill a job with youth in the youth correctional facility. And I've been helping them select the best candidate. And I think it's going to be one of our graduates, which is why I'm so happy about that. We not only work in hospitals and hospice, military, we also work in residential youth programs. We work in addictions organizations. We work in retirement communities. We work, we work in colleges. We work with disaster relief. We work in children's homes. We work with safety services, police chaplains. Police chaplaincy is a huge thing right now. I belong to an organization out of Boston called the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab. And we have been looking at our police chaplains since this situation happened in Minneapolis, and how are these chaplains coping with this place that they're at in between the protesters and the police, and what do they do, and how do they relate to both the protesters and the police, and how do they put a good face on both? And what is the role of the chaplain in that type of a situation? Chaplains work all over the place. And I think that if you're called to ministry, but you don't feel called to a local church, chaplaincy might be your area of ministry. For example, many of my students go into college chaplaincy, or to some churches today, instead of conceptualizing local ministry as evangelism and missions, which I like, they're also conceptualizing it as community service, working with homeless shelters, ecumenically with other helping organizations. And so they've adopted a chaplaincy model of how to engage the community with the church's love and ministry. And so now we have local church chaplains. One of the large churches in Columbus has trained probably 50 chaplains, and they send them out during the cold nights in the winter to work with homeless people. They go to police meetings, they go to city meetings, they're everywhere, and they're there to represent the church in that context and to do good. So chaplaincy is broad, it's growing only because people are realizing that chaplains are an added benefit, and we can think about different ways to use chaplains now than we weren't doing 50 years ago.
That's one of the things that you mentioned that resonated with me a bit was you mentioned police chaplains, and that, you know, in a time like this, how they find themselves ministering to a wide variety of people given some very difficult circumstances. And I did, as you know, I did a little bit, not much, but I did some chaplaincy work in a hospital setting. And there were a couple of instances where I found myself not only needing to minister to patients and families, but also to the staff, to nurses and physicians in the middle of very difficult circumstances. And I would imagine that chaplains, you know, find themselves doing that kind of ministry often, and certainly in the military as well, which to me sounds like very fulfilling and energizing work.
Yeah, chaplains are not just for the staff, and they're just not for the patient. Really, we're for anybody who's there.
Yeah.
God doesn't, you know, when I was working in refugee ministries, one of the things I said as a chaplain was that I'm not responsible for checking whether or not a person entered the country legally. I'm simply here to provide ministry to those who are here. And that's my job, is not to do that police job. My job is to do the God job, which is to love people and to meet them at the point of their need and offer them Jesus in some realistic way.
Yeah. So if somebody is interested in chaplaincy, someone says, you know, this sounds like the kind of ministry that I would be interested in, and it's something that I need to explore in terms of my own calling. What are the credentials and competencies that an employer would look for in a chaplain?
That question is going to be determined by the employer that you are interviewing with. Prison chaplains, hospice chaplains, hospital chaplains, military chaplains, they all have different expectations of what a chaplain should have in terms of credentials. One of the things that they all acknowledge is that a chaplain should be somebody who is ordained and represents a faith group community, but is assigned to a pluralistic institutional context, so that that person is going to be ministering to people of all faiths and no faiths and providing spiritual care in a larger context. But they still want there to be some type of credentialing related to a church or a denomination or some religious institution has vetted you and said that you are called and that you are being sent by them into the marketplace, into the world, to do chaplaincy ministry. If you're working for a hospital, usually hospitals have the most stringent requirements. To be a good hospital chaplain, to get a good job, you're going to need a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, at least 72 hours of a master's degree related to ministry, and you're going to need to have 4 units of CPE, and you're going to need to be endorsed by a denomination, and you will need to have some experience and be able to be board certified. So board certification is the ultimate certificate that says you are ready to do ministry, you've been tested, you've gone through this process, and you have all the things you need to be a professional chaplain. Board certification doesn't happen until after you've gotten into your job. So a person who comes after finishing 4 units of CPE and seminary and everything else and says, I need a job, well, that person's not going to be board certified because it takes 2,000 hours of ministry after you've completed everything else in order to apply for board certification. So we call those people in that limbo phase board certifiable, and they're very employable. Most people will employ them and say, okay, we're giving you a year or 2 years to get your certification finished. That's the most difficult. The military doesn't require CPE or board certification. They do require endorsement. They do require physical fitness. They do require age limits, and they require that you have a college degree and a seminary degree. Right now, we see that some requirements to get into the military make it difficult for people who don't have CPE to get in. A CPE on your resume makes it a lot easier for you to compete because the military, like other places, they pay well. I mean, military chaplains get paid more than pastors, and so do hospital chaplains. Hospital chaplains can start off at 65,000, and so can military chaplains. And so these are good jobs.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, so for the sake of our audience, CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education.
It does.
Which is done it's practical training done in a ministry
setting.
clinical setting.
Usually it happens in a hospital. It doesn't have to happen in a hospital. It can happen in a prison. We even have parish-based CPE units. So CPE is a field study, but it's a clinical way of a person doing action reflection ministry and learning to do ministry and to understand who they are, understand why they connect with people the way they do, to look at their blind spots, to examine their theology and how their theology predisposes them to certain things, and to be able to develop skills that are going to make them a professional chaplain, to think like a professional chaplain and to work like a professional chaplain with chaplains of other faith traditions.
Very good, very good. So you are the director of chaplaincy studies at Ashland Theological Seminary. Our program you certainly have been the one to develop that program. So talk to us a little bit about Ashland's program, Ashland's chaplaincy program. What is it designed to do to provide for the student that wants to be a chaplain?
Yeah, that's a really good program, a good question. Why should someone come to Ashland Vice, another university, or do an online degree from somebody else? Ashland has a chaplaincy concentration in their MDiv, and that chaplaincy concentration was developed actually when I came back from spending 15 months in Iraq, and then I went and I was the community manager for chaplains. And I realized during that time that many of the chaplains that I was working with had holes that were preventing them from doing their job well. They had the basic credentials and had met the basic criteria, but they just didn't have everything they needed to be a good chaplain. And so I looked at the job requirement for chaplaincy, and it's a very easy model. The job requirement is provide for your own, facilitate for people of other faiths, give spiritual care to everybody, and be a subject matter expert on everything related to culture, to religion, and to ethics. And so I said, okay, how can we actually operationalize this idea? What does it look like when someone is able to do all of this well? And so we developed the chaplaincy concentration or around what we call functional areas that are evidence-based. And so our degree in the chaplaincy program prepares our students for each area related to that. In the chaplaincy course, we have the intro course, which is really a necessary course that opens up what chaplaincy is, and it gives you the history, the theology, best practices, connects you to the literature, gives you a project in which you're going to be examining one type of chaplaincy setting to which you feel called, and you're going to know everything about that setting and how to become a chaplain. But then we also have navigating the multi-faith context. It is, I'm going to be working with people of different faith traditions. I need to understand those faith traditions. I need to know how to relate to these people. I need to be able to advocate for these people. I need to facilitate for their religious needs. So I can't just be an expert on my own religion. I have to be an expert on their religion too. And I have to be able to talk about religion in general terms. We have cultural competencies. Cultural competency realizes that we live in a multicultural society, and culture and religion and a sense of who I am are all intermeshed in a really interesting way. And chaplains have to be cultural brokers. We have to understand culture. We have to be able to do ethnographical research. We have to understand on gender issues and the way that culture molds us and the corporations that we work with. So we actually talk about corporate culture too. And we do this stuff about who am I, and we sit in groups and we talk about that, and we learn how to see culture through the eyes of other people rather than imposing our ideas and definitions. And then we have advanced ethics. Advanced ethics builds on the basic ethics course, and in the setting, a chaplain has to be able to help people make ethical decisions. A chaplain can't do that for a person, but the chaplain has to have know processes by which we can help people think critically to come to an ethical decision. But we also have to help organizations make critically informed decisions about ethics. For example, in the military, the chaplain is the conscience of the command. The chaplain can go to the commanding officer anytime and say, this is not ethical, or we have an ethical problem. And I've done that many times, by the way. And the commander has to listen to the chaplain when the chaplain comes to talk about ethics. When we had at Abu Ghraib, we had all those problems with the Army chaplains, with the abuse of the prisoners in Iraq. That was terrible. Well, that would not have happened if chaplains would have been there. But they had removed the chaplains from that context. And so there was no conscience on the ground to kind of say, this is wrong. Chaplains do that. This is just not right. And so advanced ethics is really important. Then we have 5 pastoral care and counseling courses, 2 in the MDiv cohort and 3 in the chaplaincy concentration, because we know that counseling and pastoral care are so essential to what we do. So our students have to know lots of different techniques and issues related to counseling and pastoral care. And above all that, we do CPE. We have an independent study in pastoral theology, and we have a capstone program. The capstone program pulls it all together. It takes an artifact out of all of these courses, and you develop a portfolio over your period at Ashland. And that portfolio becomes something that you take with you from our program, and it pulls it all together in a very nice way. And it's very accessible, and it's just a good program. So when you come to us, we haven't just picked some courses and said, oh, let's have a chaplaincy concentration. We've gone backwards. We said, what do chaplains need to know? What is chaplaincy? What do chaplains need to know? What skill sets do our chaplains have to function well in this environment? And how can we produce a curriculum that does that? So our curriculum prepares people to work as chaplains. There's no, there's always learning, but when you finish with us, you're ready to be employed and you know what to do.
Yeah. Bill, as you, and I've often thought this, but I was thinking it again as you were describing the program, is that one thing about our chaplaincy program is not only is it robust, which is great, but it's also been built very intentionally, and students certainly do benefit from all of that. Before we leave this conversation, I did want to ask one more question. Given the fact that you spent 30 years as a Navy chaplain, if you could briefly maybe describe one or two experiences that you had in your ministry as a chaplain that spoke to you in a way that, just reaffirmed your calling as a chaplain, maybe were somehow definitive for you in your ministry.
Sure.
Thought maybe that the audience would like to hear that.
Yeah, I've had a lot of great experiences. I've been deployed all over the world in a lot of crisis situations. In the Philippines, I did a humanitarian relief operation in the jungles for villages that had been decimated by a volcano, Mount Pinatubo. And I just worked so closely with these villagers to help them rebuild what they were doing. And I led a large team of people to do that. That was really gratifying. Working in the Cuban refugee camps in Panama in 94 and 95, we had a revival in our camp. I had over 2,300 people in my camp, and the Lord came down. We had a revival in that camp, and I couldn't keep up with the baptisms.
Wow.
We had so many baptisms, and I speak Spanish, and I love to be with Spanish people, and I brought together a team of Cuban refugees who were my assistants, and it was round the clock ministry. It was just incredible. In Iraq, my friends, I was the deputy chaplain. I was the force chaplain for maybe 2 months, but for most of my time, I was the deputy force chaplain, which made me responsible for supervising the other chaplains in the ministry program, because the boss doesn't do that. The deputy does the day-to-day work like that. And that was really gratifying, to be able to move around the battlefield and to make sure that we got chaplains to people in pockets, and then to deal with their stresses. During that time, two things stood out. One was Ugandans. I was fortunate to do ministry with Ugandans. We had a multinational force, and one of our groups were Ugandans, and I was assigned myself to do ministry with Ugandans, and I'd go to them at nighttime in their little camps, and they'd come out, and I'd get there, and they'd get in this circle, and they start singing, and the circle would grow and grow, and pretty soon we'd have a large circle, and we'd be doing African worship. It's just everything about it would be African, and I'd present a message, and then I was able to baptize an awful lot of them. And the way we baptized them, Matt, was kind of funny. We didn't have any water because we're in the desert. So my assistant would go and get this big old pickup truck, put a lining in it, and with a front end loader, they'd dump water in it, and then they'd cover it. And then my assistant, a young lady, RP2, would drive it out there, and I'd get in the back of the pickup truck, and I'd pull them in the back of the pickup truck, and I'd baptize them. And they called it, the other Marines called it my West Virginia baptism, the back of a pickup truck. It was really, really cool. Matt,
Wonderful.
Probably my most influential time was when I was being a police chaplain before I went into the military. And there was a van filled with migrant workers, and it was early in the morning, and it got hit by a truck because the truck didn't see it. It ran a light because of fog. And we had 8 bodies. And there were 3 crosses by the side of the road. One of them was against the cross, and there was blood. And it was the most gory scene. When the highway patrol showed up and the deputy showed up, I was there, of course, because I was their chaplain. And I had to minister to the families, and in the aftermath to the police. You can't look at 8 mangled bodies and not be affected by it. And if you aren't affected, you have a problem. You just need help if that doesn't bother you. And I realized that they're doing their job, but there's no one else here called to do my job.
Yeah.
And it's such a sacred place to be.
Yeah.
It's a sacred place to be. When I'm on a convoy in Iraq, nobody wants me to carry a weapon and fight the bad guys, but they want me to be there with them when they do. And I have a special ministry of presence and things that I do that nobody else can do. I represent God. I bring God to them. I help them humanize themselves. I help them humanize the enemy. And there is a benefit that chaplains have. And I love that spot. A representative of God in a place where God would not normally exist.
Mm.
Think about it, a battlefield.
Yeah.
Where else would you need chaplains?
Boy, yeah. Well, those are very impactful stories. And, obviously that's just a glimpse. I'm sure that if we had the time, you could go on for a long time talking about all of your experiences as a chaplain. But certainly your experience as a chaplain is certainly evident in our program at Ashland Seminary in terms of how not only it's been developed, but how it's taught. So,
Yeah, Matt,
thank
I'd
you
like to say I don't teach all those courses. My
I know.
PhD is in intercultural studies. I have a government subspecialty code in religion and culture. So I will teach the intro course, and I will teach the cultural competency course, and I teach the navigating the multi-faith context because this relates to world religion. But we have really good subject matter experts teaching ethics and teaching pastoral care and counseling and teaching all of our other courses. And so when you come to our program, you will be interfacing with people from other disciplines who absolutely have something to add to this program.
Yes, thank you for saying that. That is correct, and I appreciate you bringing that up. We have a wide variety of instructors who bring valuable experience and expertise into the program.
Yeah, one last thing, Matt. Before you called me, I had been reviewing Ohio jobs, and I noted that there were over 60 advertised jobs for chaplains. Most of them were hospital and hospice, but we had them at Marketplace Chaplains. We had 3 advertisements for Marketplace Chaplains, long-term care chaplains, retirement community chaplains, youth corrections chaplains, or residential programs for youth. They were all there. And the military is actively looking for chaplains. The National Guard is desperate for chaplains. A student who comes to us can join the military while they're in seminary and become a chaplain candidate. And if you go through the Army National Guard program, they pay for most of your tuition, actually. And you get to drill and you get to, wear the uniform and do those things that chaplains do. So the job market for chaplains is very strong. At the same time, when churches are closing up and we're not planting as many new churches, the chaplaincy market, as you noted earlier, is still growing.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you for that. That's valuable information for folks who might be considering a career in chaplaincy. Bill, again, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us about this very vital program and this ministry that, as you have noted in your own experiences, have made such an impact on the lives of so many people who find themselves in need of that spiritual care. So thanks again, and look forward to being able to see you soon.
Thank you, Matt. God bless.
Take care, Bill.